Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Phil Beckman. Today we're joined by Jaxon White, a reporter with LMP and Lancaster Online, Steve Ulrich, managing editor with Politics PA, and Christen Smith, PA News editor at the Center Square. Now, we are at the beginning of a lot of new things this time of year. We have a new administration in Washington and a new legislative session in Harrisburg. Christen, what types of issues are you keeping an eye on as we move forward from here?
Certainly, it'll be interesting to see how our governor meshes with Donald Trump and his stated priorities for going forward. He has a lot of emphasis in his energy plan on drilling, drill baby drill, as we know. And so obviously Pennsylvania is going to have a large role in that. Governor Shapiro has always billed himself as campaigning, or not Governor Shapiro has always billed himself as governing from the middle. And so therefore, he has said in the past that he is ready to work with Trump on issues that they're aligned. So reading between the lines there, it seems as though he is already hedging his bets that there's going to be a lot of things that Trump might want for Pennsylvania that he may not agree with.
Steve, what are you looking at?
So one of the things that we're really paying attention to is the balance of power in Harrisburg right now with the passing of Representative Matt Gergely from Allegheny County. State House currently has a 101-101 tie. And as Christen just mentioned, as the governor continues to want to govern from the middle, right now we are definitely at the middle at 101-101. The 35th Legislative District is scheduled for a special election on March 25th. More than likely, Democrats will win back that seat. But until then, what takes place at the state capitol? Is there any progress made on issues like education, the legalization of marijuana? Are there going to be any changes to election laws? So a lot of things going on in the state capitol that we're keeping an eye on.
Jaxon, how about you? What are you looking at as we begin this new session?
Like Steve mentioned, that balance of power is going to be essential going into next month, I guess in 2 weeks now at this point, where Governor Shapiro is going to give his budget address heading into this budget season this year. And really that balance of power is going to be pressuring House Democrats to see what they can get done because they're at 101-101 right now. And mainly it might just delay them, as Steve said. I mean, Democrats are expected to win back that seat on March 25th. But still, Republicans are going to have a lot more influence in the House this year, especially after the House leadership, not debacle, the House leadership vote that just happened up in Harrisburg. The Democrats cut a deal, kind of some rule changes that would benefit the minority party with Republicans. And so that's something that they'll probably have a lot of leverage moving forward, especially with the tie at 101-101 right now.
It's interesting, too, if you compare the beginning of this legislative session to where we were at in the beginning of 2023. We were also at an evenly divided House. There was a lot more drama and animosity between the two parties at that point in time, without rehashing things too much. Democrats had special elections that they needed to run in early mid-February, and they really halted work in the House until those seats were filled. And so we didn't, and then because of a roof leak in the House chamber, the House really didn't start getting its work done until mid-March, late March. So this time we're seeing a lot more bipartisanship as far as the rule changes that Jaxon mentioned, but it's going to be interesting. Will they delay again as they did in the first part of 2023, or are we going to see strides to maybe move forward on things that there is more bipartisan agreement on?
Christen, that's a good point. I think you're going to see a lot of pushback, certainly in the state Senate controlled by Republicans. That doesn't seem like the frosty relationship between Kim Ward and Josh Shapiro is going to thaw anytime soon. So does anything happen in the House until the end of March, and what's that mean with budget talks going forward, and will we see a budget completed by the end of June?
Jaxon?
Certainly, Democrats are coming into the same stronger position that they had in the last session with Governor Shapiro on their side, and we saw that unfold where the cracks in the relationship between Kim Ward and Shapiro first began to show themselves during his first budget, and those cracks have only gotten wider. So although the dynamics in the House may be slightly different as far as bipartisanship goes, you're right, that Senate piece is going to be something that if any session, or if last session is any prediction here, I think that the Senate Republicans are going to have a really uphill battle to fight as far as their budget priorities.
Something too, I think that plays into that, Kristen, is what I've heard around the Capitol is some Republicans thought that the House taking, or the Democrats taking the House, majority in the House was somewhat of a fluke in 2022, and they were able to maintain that majority in last year's in the November election. So some Republicans might need to take the House Democrats a little bit more seriously going to budget talks this year, even though they do still have that slim majority. Right now it's tied, but yeah, I think it'll be an interesting dynamic to see play out this year.
Jaxon, there's another special election coming up in your area for the 36th senatorial district. Why is that seat vacant?
Former Senator Ryan Aument resigned on December 31st to take over the statewide offices for U.S. Senator Dave McCormick. Aument and McCormick have been close for a while. Aument helped campaign for McCormick throughout last year. Still, it took some locals by shock, or a little bit by surprise, that Aument resigned from that seat. So that election is also scheduled for March 25th. Right now, Democrats have chosen East Petersburg Borough Mayor James Andrew Maloney as their candidate. That decision was made last Saturday. He's seen as a solid choice for Democrats in the district. He's been elected. He's obviously an elected official running for higher office, and in a red county, sometimes that can be a little bit rare. But the district is largely Republican. That's 53% majority of registered voters there. So most likely, whoever's chosen by the Republican Party will end up being the next state senator. That decision is made this Saturday. Right now, the two frontrunners are Lancaster County Commissioner Josh Parsons and State Representative Brett Miller. Our county Republicans in Lancaster do things a little bit differently. So they host these informal straw polls just for candidates to kind of gauge interest. To gauge interest among the local committee members and how they're feeling about their candidacy. Josh Parsons led those straw polls and had won a majority of the votes that he would need to win that nomination at this point. Brett Miller was second, a little gap there. So Miller would have to kind of lead an upset on Saturday to beat Parsons. It's looking like it's going to be County Commissioner Parsons.
Christen, you wrote about utility prices and some issues with Governor Josh Shapiro and his stance on PJM management. What's the issue there?
Shapiro is worried about the way that our power grid is currently being managed. PJM is the organization that controls the power grid for 13 states. Pennsylvania is the P in PJM. And there's a lot of complicated math behind the way that energy markets are run in order to determine what we ultimately pay for our utilities. And Shapiro is saying that because of rule changes that are in flux, that are in process, the math that PJM is currently using to run auctions that would help determine these prices should be set aside because these prices are being artificially impacted and driven up significantly in the most recent auction that is about power that's going to be provided for in the coming year. Prices increased something like 800%, which would translate to a 30% rise in utility bills. So Shapiro wants them to temporarily suspend the way that they do it in order to fix this problem. He's also got buy-in from 4 other governors, including in Illinois, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. They agree with his complaint. The issue here is that PJM's beholden to state policy. They don't set policy. They have to work with what they're given. And so they've been giving mandates from 13 different states, and they all have their own desires for their power portfolios. They have their own clean energy targets. They have their own economies. Pennsylvania is the largest power generator in the region and energy exporter. So what we look for and need is entirely different than what Maryland would want, or Illinois, or any of the other states in PJM. And so it's a lot more complicated than just, hey, change the formula you're using for a couple of years until we get these reforms in place. It's not as simple as all that, and PJM can only work within the box that they're put in, essentially.
Steve, one of the stories that you were looking at was U.S. Senator John Fetterman was reported, or there were some rumors coming around that that he might switch parties. So where did those come from?
The new senior senator from the Commonwealth has really stepped outside the circle that many Democrats thought he was in. I think a lot of Democrats statewide, certainly nationwide, are trying to figure out how to deal with the second administration of Donald Trump. It almost seems like back in 2017, it was almost a view of Democrats of this was an accident. We can push back, we can talk about all the silly statements that are made, and we can be the party of opposition. Now that the second Trump term has begun, you see a lot of business people trying to figure out how to deal with the new administration. John Fetterman has done the same thing. He's made a trip to Mar-a-Lago. He has extended an olive branch. He's talked about casting yay votes for cabinet appointees. Things that Democrats kind of wish, I think, a lot of Democrats wish that he would push back on. And he's drawn the ire of James Carville, Jamal Hawley, a state assemblyman from New Jersey, sent along a rumor on social media that he heard a prominent Democratic senator was going to change parties. And everyone kind of assumed that that man was going to be the former mayor of Braddock that was going to jump ship. John Fetterman has used rather colorful language to say that is not going to happen. And at this point, I believe him, but I think he's also a smart enough politician to figure out that he needs to find a place in the middle if he's going to be able to work with the Republican administration.
And Steve, like you mentioned, I think I just saw the news this morning that Fetterman was one of the only Democrats, if not the only Democrat, who voted to appoint Pete Hegseth. And voted in favor, and I saw that he was facing some blowback on social media for that decision too.
The one thing that we haven't seen is him change his apparel, as he came in the hoodie and the lacrosse shorts to the inauguration, which also raised some eyebrows. But John Fetterman is going to be who John Fetterman is, and I think Pennsylvanians need to just get used to that fact at this point.
Jaxon, one of the stories that you were covering was looking about how the Trump administration is going to approach the U.S. Department of Education and how that might impact local schools in your area. What were you seeing?
Well, I think everyone's familiar with this idea at this point. President Trump has said for months that he was planning to cut or eliminate the Federal Department of Education. I mean, it's trended in news for months. So we did a little bit of a dive to see how that could impact the local schools here in Lancaster County. Out of the schools here, schools are facing cuts or delays, or could face cuts or delays to about $55 million in federal funding if Trump succeeds in that plan. Most schools in Pennsylvania receive about a slice of hundreds of millions in what is Title I money sent to the state from federal grants and different federal funding. That much of that money is intended to support students in underperforming school districts. So that's one of the major concerns, that funding could be cut or lost. But some advocates think that funding might be, like the distribution of that funding might be sent to other departments to handle. And in that case, that would more likely lead to delays to that funding and cause some troubles and hiccups in schools getting that money and using it for things that they need to for students, especially in underperforming schools.
Christen, one of the issues that's overlapping the administrations is the effort by the Japanese-owned Nippon company to purchase U.S. steel. And the Biden administration put a hold on it for a bit. Any sense of how President Trump would approach the issue?
Saying on the campaign trail for a good year, ever since the deal was announced, that he's against it, that he would rather implement tariffs as a way to help make U.S. steel more competitive again. Joe Biden opposed it on national security concerns. He said that allowing a foreign company to take over U.S. steel and therefore continue unfair trade practices on the foreign market and to artificially lower prices, something that Trump also accuses China of doing. Those are their reasons. A lot of this concern of market manipulation. But where Shapiro stands is where it gets interesting. Shapiro has somewhat infamously not come on the record about how he feels one way or the other. His commitment has always been to doing what's best for Pennsylvania. He'd like to see U.S. steel jobs stay in Pennsylvania. Nippon was promising that was going to happen. And in fact, Nippon's entire deal was that they would make investments into facilities here in Pennsylvania that needed upgrades and that were hemorrhaging money, but that U.S. Steel would look and feel and, for all intents and purposes, seem still like the same American-owned company that it always was. But the union, the United Steelworkers Union, did not trust those promises and fought really hard alongside Biden to prevent that deal from going through. And Shapiro has said, well, he's brokering an agreement between all of them. And he's yet to say one way or the other. He just wants the best investment in Pennsylvania. So whether that's Nippon or whether that's another company that is in America, he is open to, he wants to see firm commitments in paper. That being said, there is a new deal supposedly coming that's being offered by Cleveland Cliffs and Nucor, which is in North Carolina. They haven't had anything written in a formal offer yet, but Shapiro has already signaled that he's open to it, which is a much different tone than he was striking with the Nippon deal. So this is one of those big issues where will he be aligned with Trump or will he not? From the very basics of what we know going into this, seems like they could be in agreement on what the right way to go here is, though. My understanding is those who support the deal between Nippon and U.S. Steel, which is Senate Republican leader Kim Ward, because that's her district where U.S. Steel is. She hopes that now that they have 6 months, they have a 6-month extension on unwinding this deal. She's hoping that they can talk to the Trump administration, convince them that the Nippon deal really is the way to go. So we'll see where that goes from here. But it's definitely going to be one of those big tests of the Trump-Shapiro relationship.
Now, there's also a lawsuit. U.S. Steel and Nippon filed a suit against Cleveland Cliffs. What's that suit about?
The lawsuit alleges that Cleveland Cliffs and the United Steelworkers Union have been in cahoots to derail the deal with Nippon because they want Cleveland Cliffs to take over U.S. Steel instead. Cleveland Cliffs had made an offer back in July of 2022-ish, yes, to buy U.S. Steel for significantly less than what Nippon would eventually offer. U.S. Steel rejected that offer. They felt that it would be turned down by regulators anyway because of potentially creating a monopoly on the steel market. And so they moved forward with Nippon. The federal regulators in that situation really couldn't come to a decision on whether it was a good idea or not. And so because of that, U.S. Steel and Nippon are saying that not only did Cleveland Cliffs conspire with the union, but they also put pressure on the regulatory process and Joe Biden in order to kill the deal and steer it right back into Cleveland Cliffs' arms.
Steve, another story that you've been covering is that of state consumer advocate Patrick Cicero resigning his position. What does the state consumer advocate do, and why did he resign?
Patrick Cicero's charge was to essentially champion the Pennsylvania consumer when it came to various issues involving public utilities and other issues. And with the incoming state attorney general, Dave Sunday, being Republican, Cicero not being of party, Dave Sunday opted to accept Cicero's resignation letter. And I think that's one of the things that all new row officers do. They ask for resignation letters and they decide who they're going to accept or not. Sunday accepted Cicero's resignation letter, and then Patrick Cicero said, well, that I was kind of coerced into that, pushed into that. So there is some controversy right now in Harrisburg about that dismissal, if you will. Cicero was widely praised by a number of folks from around the Commonwealth for the job he did, and I certainly think he will be missed. And it's just going to be a new day in Harrisburg as Republicans take, for the first time, all three state row offices: Attorney General, Auditor General, and State Treasurer.
Jaxon, you write about Lancaster County's representation in the state legislature. There have been some retirements and some changes there. What has changed to change the leadership dynamic for Lancaster County?
Yeah, this past year is really, or the past couple of months really has been just one after another of news kind of hurting Lancaster County's voice in Harrisburg a little bit and hurting some of the seniority it has there. Back in August, State Representative Mike Sturla, he was one of the longest lawmakers in Harrisburg. He announced that he was going to retire after 30 years of being in the state legislature. Then after that, a couple months later, we learned that State Rep Brian Cutler was no longer going to be seeking a leadership position in Harrisburg. He's going to stick around and still be a representative there, but he's not going to be the House Republican leader anymore. And then just a month later after that, we learned that his close friend, actually, Senate Republican Whip Ryan Almond, was going to be stepping down, as I mentioned earlier, to take a job with U.S. Senator Dave McCormick's office. So I saw that trend, and I wanted to try and figure out what was happening there. So really, a lot of experts are telling me that it's not so much about the leadership positions that that are going to be impacting Lancaster County's voice in Harrisburg. That it's going to be more of their seniority and their time and their they've put in there, the relationship that they've built over the years. A lot of the lawmakers have assured me that they're going to be. A lot of the newer lawmakers, I should say, have told me that they're going to be equally capable of representing their constituents, just as Sturla, Ahmet, and Cutler have in the past. But still, that experience and seniority does factor into how well they're able to move grant money to their district and certain things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how Lancaster does this next session. A lot of pressure will be on Senate Appropriations Chair Scott Martin. He's the only lawmaker from Lancaster County in a leadership position right now, and the Appropriations Committee is already a powerful seat, has much of the say over budget negotiations. So it'll be interesting to see in the next in this legislative session what sort of impact that will have on Lancaster County.
Jaxon, that's a good point, because I think back years ago when Bob Jubileer and Sam Hayes were running the House and the Senate in Harrisburg from Blair County, and in the ensuing years after they left, Blair County doesn't have that same type of oomph in Harrisburg. So I do think it will definitely be an impact in Lancaster County.
Jaxon, you quote in your article Stephen Medvick from Franklin and Marshall University, where he talks about the difference between seniority and leadership, and you mentioned the seniority side of it. Leadership also offers some interesting dynamics too, where people are representing their local interests of their district, but as in being in leadership, now you're looking more statewide.
Yeah, and that's something I spoke with Cutler about specifically, because he's stepping down from leadership to just to a role as a legislator. I mean, he's still having a powerful seat. He's chairman of the Education Committee, newly appointed. So he's still going to have a lot of swing in Harrisburg. And he is, now that Sturla has left, he's the longest serving Lancaster County lawmaker. He's been there since, I want to say 2007. I think he was first elected in 2006. So, but yeah, he was really, from our conversation, I got the sense that he was really excited about taking a step back from leadership, that he was going to be able to spend a lot more time with his district and moving his own legislation forward. He hasn't had time, from what he told me, to introduce legislation that he was really passionate and interested in. So now, moving forward, this legislative session, he expects a lot more bills to come out of his office.
Christen, we have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to touch on a bill that Senator Gene Yaw has addressing skill games. What's he trying to do there in terms of regulation and taxation?
He has been petitioning for several years now to bring skill game machines out of a legal gray area and into the light. He wants them to be taxed and regulated. Because that way we could use the money, the $300 million estimated that we would get in tax revenue, in order to help fund our Clean Streams Fund, which restores waterways and tackles other environmental priorities in Pennsylvania. These skill games, what makes them different from your typical slot machine is that they involve some amount of skill. They involve human interaction. It's not just pulling a lever and getting lucky. They are commonly found at American Legions. You can find them in different restaurants and bars. You can find them in all kinds of social clubs. They're definitely something for small businesses. It's not like a little lottery or a little casino or anything to that effect. In fact, y'all's bill would make sure that sort of situation doesn't happen. And the idea here is that if we regulate it, businesses can have them legally, doesn't have to worry about crossing or violating the law, but also they cannot run a business that solely makes profit off of these machines. A lot of small businesses and social clubs say that this is a really big benefit to them. The bill does include safeguards for as far as the concerns that these machines might attract a criminal element, but it's the same bill that we've seen in sessions past. Now, Governor Shapiro has expressed an interest in regulating skill games. Senate Republican leadership is also on board with it. So perhaps this is the session where it finally gets done, but it's certainly one of his top legislative priorities.
Well, our guests on today's Journalist Roundtable have been Jaxon White, a reporter with LMP and Lancaster Online, Steve Ulrich, managing editor at Politics PA, and Christen Smith, PA news editor at the Center Square. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
I'm Phil Beckman. Thank you for watching.